Hello, my name is Bishop Aubrey Shines. I'm senior pastor of Glory to Glory Ministries in Tampa, Florida. The German theologian Bonhoeffer once said this: "Silence in the face of evil is itself evil. God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak," he said, "is to speak. Not to act is to act." Over the last 4 years, Christian leaders have been intentional in their silence on homosexuality and same-sex marriage specifically. They have chosen not to speak and not to act. Clergymen, you know who you are. Now that the Supreme Court has made a way for dismantling God's first creation, the family, you stand like foolish leaders in shock, wondering how it happened. Either you lack the ability to discern, which is the mark of a mature church, and your lack of discernment misled your congregants on the most vital issue that our nation has ever encountered. Or you knew the truth, but for fear of offending your congregation, you have lacked courage and offended your God. You knew the will of God, but for the fear of losing tithers, your lack of courage has mocked God. You have now co-signed on with Hollywood and Madison Avenue's insanity by silently affirming this new abnormal modern family as the will of God. You have the knowledge that would give your congregants clarity on the issue of homosexuality. But instead of saying that same-sex marriage is not the will of God, you lacked courage. You have spent the last decade preaching about territory increases and encouraging your congregation to claim the million-dollar blessings that they are supposedly owed, I guess, by God. You have taught them that having titles and holding positions is a sign of them being in the right church. You have placed the wrong people in positions of leadership just to soothe their own appetites. Shame on you for judging a man by the color of his skin, and not as Dr. King prophetically commanded all of us to do, and that is to judge a man by the content of his character. Shame on you for allowing yourself to be deceived by President Barack Hussein Obama. Your blind support of this president has allowed him to advance the homosexual agenda in defiance to the will of God. You cowardly avoided the issues of politics from your pulpit, yet you bring in politicians who publicly contradict the very sacredness of God. You speak of kingdom dominion in the earth, but never confront the issues of politics. You cowardly avoid topics simply because you don't want to offend. Did Jesus not speak the truth no matter what the consequences were? To my cowardly white clergy brothers, because of your fear of offending blacks that are part of your congregation, you never exposed the polytheistic gospel of this president, even though you knew that you didn't agree with it. You fear that your black congregants would call you bigots and destroy your multicultural idealism and imagery. Your politically correct desire to prove to this generation that you are not bearing the cloak of racism that your forefathers so proudly wore, avoiding being obtuse for fear that you would be martyred by the entitlement-minded blacks that you serve as senior leader. To my cowardly black clergy brothers, you selected a president whose own party has publicly denounced the God of your forefathers, as well as the state of Israel, who, according to the Apostle Paul, are yet the apple of God's eye. You saw an opportunity to put a black man in office without measuring him by the words of Dr. Martin Luther King. Your plantation mentality enslaves you to never veer off the plantation and explore what might be better for your congregants. While you may indeed at times preach that God's way is for a man and woman to be married, you elect officials who support the very cause that you preach against. Our president's socialist views will never emancipate our country, but will continue to chain poor people to the breast of a government whose 50 plus years of entitlement programs have never unshackled them yet? Why have you not demanded that the same privileges that are given to the president's children, as well as the entire Congress and their children, which attend, by the way, private schools, be afforded your children with vouchers that are paid for by our tax dollars? In a 2008 interview with the gay magazine, The Advocate, then Senator Obama was asked why blacks did not support the homosexual agenda. To that, the President Obama stated, "I think it has to do with the fact that the African American community is more churched, and most African American churches are still fairly traditional in their interpretations of Scripture. And so from the pulpit or in sermons, you'll still hear homophobic attitudes expressed. And since African American ministers are often the most prominent figures in the African American community, those attitudes get magnified or amplified a little bit more than in other communities," end of quote. Yet, on the 26th day of June 2013, those same black leaders that President Obama referred to would not speak the truth in love, nor stand up for the kingdom of our God. On that day, our president proudly declared, and I quote him, "I applaud the Supreme Court's decision to strike down the Defense of Marriage Act. The Supreme Court has righted that wrong, and our country is better off for it," end of quote. I boldly and without shame disagree with you, Mr. President. Our country is not better off. Our country is not better off by saying any combination of adults make a marriage. Our country is not better off by redefining marriage to mean any combination of adults could find themselves in a polyamorous relationship. Clergy, you cannot allow your crush on Obama or even your dislike for conservatives or Republicans to silence you on this issue or any issue. Our nation is now in moral confusion because you have lacked courage. In conclusion, let us remember the words of Noah Webster when he stated this: "If the citizens neglect their duty and place unprincipled men in office, the government will soon be corrupted. If our government fails to secure public prosperity and happiness, it must be because the citizens neglected God's divine commands, which is to seek God first and not allow bad men to make and administer the laws. I challenge you to allow the Christ of your salvation to fill you with His Spirit, which will then endue you with power. Clergymen, speak boldly against any political leader from any political party that does not hold to the teachings of our Christ and His apostles. It was clearly expressed in the Holy Writ, and I quote it, "Let it be impressed on your mind that God commands you to choose rulers and just men who will rule in the fear of God." God bless you, and God help our nation.